Okay, so we just finished talking about Divine's model, and what we have to remember once again is that what you have is this genuine automatic prejudices and stereotypes. Remember, these are not bad. These are not bad to have. However, it is bad when you cannot express them. When you express them, sorry. What the Divine study showed was that prejudice and non-prejudice people alike both have stereotypes. All right, they both have stereotypes. That happens, but it's our ability to control them is what separates or suppress them is what separates high versus low prejudice people. All right, now what? So this is a good starting point for describing how stereotypes and prejudices can predict behaviors. But what really put this to the forefront was going to be the extension that Chris Crandall did. So Chris Crandall, what he did is he created something called the justification suppression model. And as you can see, it is identical here to the Divine model. Right? So everything that I just circled is identical. You have genuine prejudice, you have suppression, you have expressed or experienced prejudice, that means discrimination. So you have those things, but what he argued is this box here. This box, the justification box, is the brand new box to the party. And what he said is that people, if they start to suppress their genuine prejudices, if they can find an excuse or any sort of justification to use their genuine prejudices, then they will, and that's going to lead to discrimination. So this is, remember the example I gave, I think it was the first lecture, where let's say you have a black and a white person who have identical job applications. They're both very qualified. The black candidate comes from Yale, the white candidate comes from Harvard. Let's say that a white person is in charge of deciding who to hire, and they can only pick one, the black or the white candidate. Let's say that person is genuinely prejudiced. Let's say that person thinks that all black people are lazy. That's going to be the genuine prejudice. They are motivated to suppress it because it's illegal to base hiring practices on race. So they're motivated to suppress it. However, so therefore, they're not going to use race as their judgment, right? And they're not going to be discriminatory. However, what happens now if they justify their genuine prejudice? So what happens now is this arrow comes, and the same person who's doing the hiring is going to say something to the effect of, oh, guess what? Harvard's better, so therefore I'm going to hire the white person. It's not because of race. No. It's because Harvard's better than Yale. But this is just an excuse. This is a way for them to get what they want without being illegal. That's the justification process. Let me give you a more blatant example. Is after Trump got elected, so this is on election night, what ended up happening was a lot of colleges experienced forms of discrimination. For example, Elon University, which I believe is in North Carolina, what happened with them is they would have the next day after the election on a blackboard, there was writing that said, Hasta la vista, Latinos, we're going to build the wall. There's also reports in a Michigan middle school where a bunch of white kids started chanting, build that wall, in a school cafeteria, and all these Latino kids were obviously very upset and started crying and whatnot. And what's happening now is the idea here is that people have genuine prejudices that they suppress. But as soon as Trump got elected, because of his rhetoric on the campaign trail, they're just like, hey, if the president can do it, so can I. And that's their justification. Or this man in Utah, right, who just stabbed some people. He was yelling at a black Muslim woman. So usually that's his genuine prejudice. He doesn't like them. Usually he would suppress it. And then all of a sudden, he's like, oh, freedom of speech, First Amendment. Ever since Trump got elected, we can do that. So First Amendment. That's their justification. And then he's going to express that prejudice. So the justification is kind of the new piece that Crandall added, and it makes a lot of sense that if you can find a readily made excuse for your genuine prejudices, then you don't need to suppress anymore. Now, one thing I do want to note is there's no arrow going here. Like, that arrow doesn't exist. You must experience suppression first, and then you're just like, this is a lot of work. Forget that noise. I'm going to justify it. And that's why you see the only arrow going into justification from right here. Now, a couple of things with this model. Like we said, according to Divine, genuine prejudice is automatic and effortless. Suppression, however, takes energy. Remember when we talked about the self, we talked about the self-regulatory resource model where the self is like a muscle. It's just like that. Suppression is self-control. Suppression is you are controlling yourself. It's taking a muscle, so it takes energy. You have to think about it, so it's high effort, but in short-lived because you can only do so much lifting, metaphorically, of course. All right. Now, what's going to happen is justification comes in. They use the term it releases energy, but really what they mean here is that you no longer have to flex your self-control muscle. If you can find an excuse, you're just like, I don't have to control myself anymore. So you release that energy, you relax that muscle. Now, it requires attention, right? You have to actively search and think about what excuse can I give? What justification sounds good? Like, you have to think about it, and it happens in response to suppression. But what's going to happen is every time this goes down, you're going to have your genuine prejudices. If it gets suppressed, sometimes that's a good thing, and you don't act bigoted. However, other times, if you can find a justification for it, you can act bigoted, but to the outside world, it's justified. Just like the hiring thing I just said, or the example I just gave. So that's it for the cognitive piece to this. I want you to look at the subheading, right, where it talks about where does prejudice come from, sources of prejudice. This is all the cognitive piece. So notice how it revolves around stereotypes, okay? And that's where Divine work started and Crandall's work picked up. But there are other reasons why, other sources of prejudice, other reasons why prejudice comes. And one is going to be from Allport. Allport, he's going to take the social approach to this. And what Allport, by the way, was a genius. Allport wrote a book in the 50s called The Nature of Prejudice. And what made him a genius is that in the 50s, there wasn't a lot of good, reliable data on this topic yet. But he just wrote down what he thought. And we have spent the last 70 years doing research, and the findings have basically confirmed what he thought. Like, he was such a visionary. He, in my mind, is one of the most influential social psychologists of all time. And what he argued in his book, without any data, was that unequal status breeds prejudice. So what he said is, where does prejudice come from? He said that prejudice starts when you are very young and you start to notice differences. All right. So, for example, my son, when he was 3, he started noticing that boys and girls are different. Okay. He also started noticing that he looked different because he's white than some of his classmates. Like, for example, he has a Latin classmate who he's of Latino descent. And what happened was, and they were friends, they would play. And what happened was at the grocery store over the weekend, he would see, my 3-year-old son would see another Latino kid. Not the same friend he plays with. But he would yell out, "Oh my gosh, it's him. It's the kid from daycare. It's my friend." I'm like, no, they just look alike. It's not the same kid. You just think it is because they look alike. Now, what Alport does not say that my 3-year-old is a prejudiced kid. But it starts when you start noticing differences. All right? That's where when you start categorizing people based on these differences. Like, boys and girls are different. Latin boys versus white boys are different. Like, that's what my son started to do, and that's where it starts. But where it becomes prejudice is where you start making judgments about people. All right, when you start making judgments based on those categorizations. So the second that you start saying, like, oh, boys can't do dishes, only girls can do dishes, that's where the categorization starts to get dangerous. And it's perfectly natural for little kids to say things like that. And it's up in my opinion, it's up to the parents to be responsible and correct that or model a behavior differently. Like in my house, I do all the dishes, and my wife is the one who does all the handiwork, and she's good at that, and I'm not. And so my son sees that, and that's good that he sees that. He sees that I'm the one doing the dishes, not always mom. And what Alport then says, you take that a step further, and you start saying, whenever you feel that there are differences and that makes you better than someone else, that inequality, that is where prejudice starts to come in, and that's bad. All right? Don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. We don't have time. All right? So that's what Alport said, and we have spent a lot of our time dealing with this and studying this phenomenon, and it's only going to get more and more research attention, especially now that, for example, I'm not a very politically oriented person, but apparently some people would argue that the Republican Party is putting forth a lot of legislation that helps rich people and hurts poor people, and that is going to be an unequal status issue, right? Now the second, so we have cognitive, check. We already talked about that. That's Devine's work. That's Crandall's work. Social, check. That's Alport. The final place of prejudice is motivational, and I never know how to pronounce his name. It's written right here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. That guy. What he said is we are motivated to like our in-group and dislike our out-group. So an in-group is basically how you define yourself. So for example, right now I define myself as a professor. That's my in-group. All professors at Gettysburg College are my in-group. We all share some common group kind of inclusion. We're all part of the same group. The out-group is anyone who's not a Gettysburg College professor. Now, you can get as specific or as broad as you want. Like, for example, I could say I'm a white, heterosexual, Christian male in Gettysburg from the Midwest. Anyone else who's a part of that group, that is my in-group. Anyone else is not. And what's going to happen is I'm going to like my in-group over my out-group. And how this researcher, once again, who I cannot pronounce his name, how he does this is he uses something called the minimal groups paradigm. The minimal groups paradigm is something that's really kind of neat, and what you do is you have participants go into a room and you randomly assign them to two groups. Let's say the red team and the blue team. The red team, what they'll do is go to the left side of the room. The blue team goes to the right side of the room. So now you have two groups, two different sides of the room that were split randomly. There's no rhyme or reason for their group status except for it's just the flip of a coin. Your blue team, flip of a coin, your red team. What happens is if you have them engage in some sort of task where they either have to compete against each other, the blue team and the red team compete, what you're going to get instantly is in-group bias, where you like your group better than the other group, just because you're in it. All right, it's a very self-serving thing. It's very automatic. It happens without us even knowing about it. But what's going to happen is we're going to like the group that we're in. That's in-group bias. And what's interesting about this is, once again, it's random. That's the thing that gets me about this. Like, humans are so weird because we're so lazy, right? It's random. Like, I'm just like, oh, I don't like that person over there. If you ask the person why, oh, because they're part of the other team. Well, how did the other teams get made? Random. So why do you not like that person? Like, they couldn't answer it. It's because we're so lazy that all of a sudden we're just like, oh, we're a part of the red team. That means we're the best, and the blue team sucks. Like, it's so random how we do that. But we're motivated to think that way, right? It's a basic human motivation that we're lazy, and it makes us feel good. All right, it makes us feel good. So the last thing we need, so that's it for sources of prejudice. The last thing we need to talk about is going to be something called stereotype threat, and then we're done for the class.